0. This is breaking news, and what just happened between Canada and China could be the single most significant shift in North American trade dynamics in modern history. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government just doubled down on a comprehensive trade deal with China, and I am not talking about some minor adjustment or a symbolic diplomatic gesture. I am talking about Canada looking directly at Donald Trump's threat of 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods and saying we are doing this anyway. The details of what just unfolded are extraordinary, and if you want to understand developments like this that are reshaping the global economic order before the mainstream media catches up, hit subscribe right now because this story is moving fast and its consequences will affect everyone watching. 042. Let me walk you through exactly what happened because every detail here matters enormously. In January, Mark Carney traveled not to Washington but to Beijing. While he was there, Canada and China finalized a comprehensive trade agreement that fundamentally alters the economic landscape of this entire continent. China agreed to reduce tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, including canola, lobsters, and peas, real products from real Canadian farmers and fishermen who have been getting squeezed for years. But here is the part that has Washington absolutely losing its mind. Canada dropped its tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% down to 6%. And they are allowing up to 49,000 Chinese-made electric vehicles into Canada annually. 127 Trump had warned Canada. He stood up in January and threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if this deal went through. He said Canada would become a drop-off port for Chinese products aimed at the American market. The usual fear-mongering and bullying tactics that have defined U.S.-Canada relations for far too long. And Carney did it anyway. Now let me explain why this is so much bigger than trade numbers on a spreadsheet. For decades, Canada has been economically tethered to the United States in a way that has been suffocating. Roughly 75% of Canadian exports have traditionally gone south of the border. That kind of dependence gives the United States enormous leverage, and successive American administrations have used it, sometimes subtly, sometimes with all the delicacy of a sledgehammer. Trump's tariff threats were not new. They were just louder, cruder versions of pressure that has always existed. 219. What Carney is doing, what this China deal represents, is Canada finally saying enough is enough. His administration has set a goal of dramatically increasing non-U.S. exports by 2035. They are not talking about minor adjustments. They are talking about fundamentally diversifying Canada's economic partnerships so that no single country, especially not the United States, can hold Canada's economy hostage. And the timing could not be more devastating for Washington because right now, American pressure tactics are backfiring in spectacular fashion. Trump thought his 100% tariff threat would make Canada back down. Instead, it accelerated Canada's pivot to China. It proved to Canadians exactly why they need to diversify. It made the case for Carney's strategy better than any political speech ever could. 307. Now let me tell you who is benefiting from this deal right now, today, because this is not some abstract future scenario. Real Canadian industries are already seeing real results. China reopened its market to Canadian beef after a ban in place since 2021. Do you understand what that means for Canadian ranchers, for processors, for entire communities that depend on the cattle industry? We are talking about access to one of the world's largest beef markets, jobs, revenue, economic stability for communities that have been struggling for years. Canadian farmers growing canola, raising lobsters, producing peas now have reduced tariffs getting their products into the Chinese market. These are concrete economic benefits translating directly into better livelihoods for Canadian agricultural workers right now. 352. And then there is the electric vehicle piece. By allowing Chinese EVs into Canada at dramatically reduced tariffs, Canada is positioning itself at the forefront of the electric vehicle transition. These are affordable vehicles that Canadians actually want and need. The American auto industry has been slow to adapt, expensive, and frankly out of touch with what consumers want. Chinese manufacturers have been dominating the global EV market. Canada just decided to give its citizens access to quality, affordable electric vehicles, instead of protecting a failing American auto industry that refuses to innovate. 427. Now let me tell you what is happening inside Washington, because the reaction there reveals everything about how badly this has backfired on American interests. Trump and his allies are scrambling because what they are realizing, probably too late, is that their bullying tactics simply do not work anymore. Canada called their bluff. Think about it from the American perspective. They relied on economic dominance over Canada for so long that they forgot Canada has options. They forgot that Canada is a G7 nation with enormous natural resources, a highly educated workforce, and the ability to forge partnerships with other major economies. When Trump threatened that 100% tariff, he thought he was wielding ultimate leverage. What he actually did was demonstrate to every Canadian precisely why reducing dependence on the United States is an urgent national priority. He handed Carney the perfect political justification for pivoting to China. 519. And now American businesses face the consequences. If the U.S. follows through on those tariff threats, American consumers lose access to Canadian lumber, Canadian energy, Canadian agricultural products, Canadian automotive parts. Supply chains integrated for decades would be torn apart. Costs would skyrocket across the American economy. And for what? To punish Canada for daring to have an independent trade policy? 543. Here is what makes this even more strategically devastating for Washington. China is winning this exchange without firing a single shot. Beijing did not have to threaten anyone. They did not bully Canada. They just offered a fair deal, one that recognized Canada as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. In doing so, they have driven a wedge between the United States and one of its closest historical allies. China gets increased access to the Canadian market, gets a foothold in North America for its electric vehicles, and demonstrates to every country on Earth that there is a viable alternative to American economic domination. This is strategic brilliance from Beijing. They simply had to be reasonable while the United States was being unreasonable. They had to offer partnership while America offered threats. 631. And now every other country is watching Canada successfully diversify away from the United States, watching American pressure tactics fail in real time, watching China position itself as a reliable, reasonable trade partner. But there is something even deeper happening here that gets lost in all the trade statistics. This is fundamentally about sovereignty. This is about Canada asserting its right to make its own economic decisions without permission from Washington. For too long, there has been an assumption that Canadian governments need to consider American interests first and Canadian interests second. That is not partnership. That is subordination. Carney is declaring that Canada is a sovereign nation making decisions based on Canadian interests, full stop. If that aligns with American preferences, wonderful. If it does not, that is what being an independent country looks like. 721, and you can see how threatening this is to the American establishment. Because if Canada can successfully assert economic independence, what stops Mexico from doing the same? What stops other countries in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia? The entire framework of American economic dominance depends on other nations believing they have no alternatives. Canada is proving those alternatives exist, and that is terrifying to Washington. 745. The environmental dimension of this deal deserves serious attention because it connects directly to the electric vehicle component. Canada has ambitious climate goals, and meeting those goals requires rapidly transitioning to electric transportation. But if electric vehicles remain prohibitively expensive for most Canadian families, that transition cannot happen fast enough. By allowing Chinese EVs at reduced tariffs, Carney's government is accelerating that transition, making electric vehicles accessible to ordinary families rather than just wealthy early adopters. That reduces emissions, helps Canada meet its Paris Agreement commitments, and positions Canada as a genuine climate leader. Meanwhile, the United States, with its protectionist tariffs keeping Chinese EV prices artificially high, is actually slowing its own transition to electric vehicles. American consumers face higher prices, so adoption rates stay lower and emissions targets become harder to meet. 838 Canada is choosing the pragmatic path that actually serves its climate goals, while America protects legacy industries at the expense of the environment. Now there is a credibility crisis unfolding in Washington that deserves examination. Trump threatened 100% tariffs if Canada did this deal. Canada did the deal. Now what? If Trump does not follow through, the threat is exposed as empty, and every future American threat carries less weight with every country on Earth. If he does follow through, he triggers economic pain inside the United States that makes the threat look foolish and self-destructive. Either way, American credibility takes a devastating hit. And that matters enormously because international relations depend heavily on credibility. When your threats are not believed, you have lost one of your most powerful tools of influence. 926. Canada, on the other hand, is building credibility rapidly. They said they would diversify trade. They are doing it. They said they would not be bullied by American threats. They are proving it. Other countries see this, and Canada's reputation as an independent sovereign actor on the world stage rises with every passing week. This is not just about one trade deal. This is about how nations are perceived, about who is seen as reliable and who is seen as erratic. Right now, Canada is winning that perception battle decisively. 958. Some people will ask whether this damages the broader US-Canada alliance, whether trade tensions spill into security cooperation. That is a legitimate question, but alliances work best between equals. When one partner treats the other as subordinate, when one partner assumes it can make demands and expect automatic compliance, that is not a healthy alliance. What Canada is doing is insisting on a more equal partnership. That might create short-term friction, but long-term it is actually healthier for the relationship because it would be based on mutual respect rather than one country's ability to coerce the other. 1032. The broader lesson here about economic coercion in the 21st century is profound. For decades, the United States used economic pressure as its primary foreign policy tool. Sanctions, tariffs, threats of market denial. It worked because American economic dominance was so overwhelming that countries rarely had realistic alternatives. But the global economy has transformed. China has risen as an alternative center of economic gravity. Regional trade blocs have formed. Countries have diversified their partnerships. American economic threats no longer carry the weight they once did. Canada's successful pivot to China in direct defiance of American threats is a case study in this new reality. It demonstrates that middle-power countries can successfully resist American economic coercion if they are willing to develop alternatives. 1122. And every country watching is learning from Canada's example, seeing that American threats can be weathered, that alternatives exist, that economic sovereignty is achievable. Let me bring this to where we are right now in real time, because the next moves matter enormously. The ball is in America's court. Does Trump actually follow through on his 100% tariff threat? If he does, he triggers a trade war that damages American businesses and consumers far more than it hurts Canada. Canadian exports would face massive tariffs, yes, but American imports from Canada would vanish, causing supply chain chaos, price surges, and shortages across the American economy. More likely, there will be enormous bluster from Washington, angry statements, possibly some targeted retaliatory measures, but not the full tariff wall that was threatened because implementing it would be economic self-destruction. 1213. For Canada, the strategy is crystal clear. Continue diversifying trade relationships. Continue building partnerships with China, with Europe, with Asia, with Latin America. Continue reducing dependence on the American market so that American threats become progressively irrelevant. Canada is pursuing trade agreements with India, with the European Union, with Southeast Asian nations. The goal is building a diversified portfolio of trade relationships so that no single country can ever again exert the kind of pressure the United States has historically wielded. 1245, this is genuinely historic. Canada just demonstrated that a middle power can successfully defy American economic pressure when it develops real alternatives. Carney looked at Trump's 100% tariff threat and went ahead with the deal anyway. Canadian farmers and businesses already have improved access to Chinese markets. Canadian consumers will soon have access to affordable Chinese electric vehicles. The trade diversification strategy is producing concrete, measurable results. Meanwhile, American threats have been exposed as ineffective. The pressure campaign did not force Canada to cancel the deal. It accelerated it, justified it, and made it politically essential for Carney to prove that Canada will not be intimidated. The economic dynamic that has defined this continent for decades is fundamentally shifting. Canada is asserting genuine sovereignty. America is losing its ability to dictate terms. 1339. And the rest of the world is watching, learning, and building its own alternatives to American economic dominance.